Welcome to worship at First Presbyterian Church in Bend, Oregon. My name is Stephen, the lead pastor here at First Presbyterian. And whether you come from somewhere across the world, maybe you live right here in Central Oregon, or somewhere in between, I'm really delighted that you've joined us for worship this morning. Here I am at the church labyrinth, which is not only our gift to our church community, it's the gift to the wider community as well. And it just sits right below our building. You know, Jan Richardson wrote, "Let there be an opening into the quiet that sits beneath the chaos. And there you might see what shimmers within the storm. And you might find the peace you didn't think possible." So today, in our worship, we're kind of leaning into those words from the psalmist. Be still and know. You know, it is said that music is only music because of the silent spaces between the notes. Without those silent spaces, you just have noise. So today we're going to attend to those silent spaces that we might sense and feel and live into the rhythms of God's grace. So for our invitation to worship, I want to strike this singing bowl, because so often our thoughts, our anxious thoughts, take us anywhere other than where we are. So as I strike this singing bowl, may it be an invitation for you to journey from wherever you happen to find yourself to being here in this moment, being present to God who is present to you. Welcome.
We believe in a God who is everywhere and right here, now. Bigger than the sky and in the smallest details. All at once and in every moment. We believe that God meets us where we are, in heartbreak and high hopes, around crowded tables of laughter and in quiet moments of anxiety, in joy and in suffering, in loneliness and in connection, in beautiful sanctuaries and in homeless shelters, in peaceful marches and in intensive care units. We believe that nothing we do or leave undone can separate or distance us from God's love. God is forever drawing us close and pulling us in. God is forever welcoming us home to the love that has never left us. God is forever reminding us we were made from love, to be love, to give love. Thanks be to God for a love like that. May we open our hearts to the presence of God's love in our worship, that we might become the presence of that love in the world. Again and again, God speaks, and we are called to listen.
slows the pace. God it is who speaks and names us, knows our being, touches base, making space within our thinking, lifting shades to show the sun, raising courage when we're shrinking, finding scope for faith begun. In the Spirit, let us travel, open to each other's pain. Let our loves and fears unravel, celebrate the space we gain. There's a place for deepest dreaming, there's a time for hearts to care. In the Spirit's lively scheming, there is always room to spare.
Have you sat in silence this week at all? Or rather, have you tried to be quiet on purpose? Being silent or quiet on purpose has been a spiritual practice for a long time. Some say it's the language of the soul, the way that we can connect more deeply with ourselves, with God, and with the world around us. But silence might seem like a hard thing to come by these days. Whether it's the noise from the countless updates, articles, and opinions streaming across our devices, or just the fact that many of us are spending a lot of time at home with our families, all trying to work and play in the same space. We might have tablets and phones and Zoom calls for everyone almost every day, and it can feel almost impossible to get a break from the noise. But choosing to practice silence doesn't mean that everything around you has to be silent. In fact, the thing that always surprises me the most when I finally decide to sit and be still is not how quiet everything is, but rather how loud. Have you ever gone and sat outside somewhere, maybe even by the river, and just listened? You might hear the water moving by or lapping up against the edge of the shore, birds singing, leaves rustling, animals scurrying. You might even begin to notice your own body. Feel it firm on the ground. Feel the breeze against your skin and begin to hear your own heartbeat, the sound of your lungs breathing in and out, the quiet words and thoughts whispering inside of you. I wonder what you might even hear in your own home or neighborhood. Our scripture today is from 1 Kings. It tells of a prophet in the Old Testament named Elijah, and when he went out alone on a mountain to hear God pass by. It says that first there was a very powerful wind, and then an earthquake, and then a fire. But God wasn't in any of those. No, God came to Elijah after everything had settled in the surprisingly powerful silence. Now maybe we don't have to go out looking for God like Elijah. We know that God is with us, but sometimes there's just so many distractions that we don't notice and we don't listen as closely. Sometimes we might see or hear so many things that we become anxious or worried. We might even begin to forget how loved we are or that God is here with us. And there's nothing wrong with noise or making noise. It's good to cry or laugh or be a little silly or even give out a great big shout sometimes. But I know that when I find time to be quiet on purpose, I feel so much more calm, even when I'm not sitting still. It can remind us that God's love is within us. And the more that we're reminded that we are loved, the easier it is to look at others, even if we don't agree with them, look like them, or enjoy the same things as them. And remember that they are loved by God also. This helps us to show the love and kindness and compassion that Jesus taught us to show, even when it's hard. And now, please join us in our blessing. We say these words as a reminder of how loved each of us are and our great hope that we will grow in love and share it in big and small ways each day. You're invited to even extend your hands if you'd like as the symbol that we are holding one another, even as we're apart, as we say, you are loved by God no matter what. May you know love, grow in love, and show love to others. Amen.
I'm so glad to have with us this morning Lorraine Stewart. Lorraine is a retired pastor and is a current spiritual director. Spiritual directors help people enter into prayer and silence. So Lorraine, I'm going to let you just take it from here.
Thanks, Kelly. We all know that silence is important. We're often reminded that silence is God's first language. And I began to think of it recently as sort of like having a personal meeting room, like you do on Zoom. It's responding to God's invitation to meet together with the Spirit of God in a personal meeting room. Matthew 6:6 says it really well. When you pray, go into your inner room, shut the door, and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who is in secret will reward you. That's a promise that doesn't say a thing about words. So we don't know what that reward is, but we do know that God sees us just as we are, through and through. So how do we learn to enter into silence? I know some people say they just can't do that. Their mind is too full and too many thoughts, too many activities. But it is something we can learn. And we start small, maybe just 5 minutes of silence, one day at a time. Or if even that isn't possible, one thing I think works well is to have an icon, like on your computer screen, have a little icon that reminds you to turn to God in that moment and breathe in the Spirit of God and let go of whatever is bothering you. So the icon could be anything. I know in my life, in my home, an icon that's important to me is just looking out the kitchen window into the backyard where the birds are having a fine day. And at that moment when I see it, I just say thank you, take a couple of breaths, and then go about whatever I'm doing. So silence is a beautiful invitation, and it's a gift that's well worth unwrapping. So that's a little of what I think about silence.
Thank you, Lorraine.
I will come to you in the silence. I will lift you from all your fear. You will hear my voice. I'll claim you as my choice. Be still and know I am here. Do not be afraid, I am with you. I have called you each by name. Come and follow me. I will bring you home. I love you and you are mine. I am strength for all the despairing, healing for the ones who dwell in shame. All the blind will see, the lame will all run free, and all will know my name. Do not be afraid, I am with you. I have called you each by name. Come and follow
God, I don't know how to be silent, to wait for you to speak. I know how to fill the quiet, to numb myself with the blaring of the TV, to bliss out to the tunes on my car radio, or to share my opinions on social media. I know how to laugh boisterously and to shout vociferously, and I know how to pontificate with authority. But I don't know how to be silent. At least, not for very long. It makes me uncomfortable, bored, fidgety. My mind wanders and my foot begins to tap the floor, or I just fall asleep. Because I worry that if I am not the loudest, I might not be heard. If I don't speak my mind, I might be overlooked, or worse, thought to be weak. If I don't tell you and everyone else what I need, I might go without. And yet, you come to us in the silence. You do some of your best work there, in the quiet of our hearts. I think Jesus must have known this, God, because when he was crucified, when he was nailed to a cross and pierced in his side, when he hung there dying of thirst and a broken heart, he was quiet, silent even, only speaking to ask you to forgive us. And then as darkness fought to win, he finally cried out and he said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit, into your hands." And then it was silent once more. That's when it seems you spoke, when you healed, when you defeated death in the silence of the grave. God, as we come before you in prayer, may we be silent enough to hear you speak, hopeful enough to believe you will, trusting enough to step with you into new life. Friends, you are invited to be silent, to pray with only the words of your heart, and to listen for God speaking to you. Let us be silent. Loving God, as we emerge from silence, we use words again, words that your Son taught us to pray, saying, "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen."
The Lord said to Elijah, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of God, for God is about to pass by." Then a great powerful wind tore the mountain apart and shattered the rocks before God. but God was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but God was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but God was not in the fire. And after the fire came the sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave.
Here I am in my study at home. This is the spot, if you like, my little altar, where I sit for 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes at night most days, to sit in the presence of God, the presence that is always present to us, to sit with centering prayer. As I mentioned earlier, Jan Richardson said, "Let there be an opening into the quiet that sits beneath the chaos. And there you might see what shimmers in the storm. And you might find the peace you didn't think possible." You know, COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations are dropping. Vaccines are growing. That light at the end of the tunnel that for months and months and months we just assumed was a train barreling at us, now actually might be a light at the end of the tunnel. We hear people talking about returning to the way things were, people talking about going back to normal. You know, we need to change our language. There is no such thing as going back. There is only going forward. And then honestly, there are some things about what we used to consider normal that aren't sustainable, that are destructive, that are best left behind. So the question isn't, how will we get back to the way things were? The question is, how will we move forward and build a better future? To build a better version of ourselves. One that is more in line with what God intends for our lives. Not just our lives, but all of God's children. What is needed in going forward is wisdom. You know, we are bombarded and overloaded with information. We're starving for wisdom. Where do we find wisdom? Well, the psalmist in Psalm 46 would suggest, be still. Be still and know. And the Hebrew there for know, rapha, isn't knowledge, isn't head knowledge. Be still that you might have more information. It actually speaks about an inner knowing. Be still that your heart might know, that your intuition might know, that your soul might know. We're in the season of Lent. Lent has truly and fully begun. And Lent is a time to pause. It's a time to reflect. It's actually a time to restart. To restart the ways that we are present in the world. And I think one of the things that is most essential to changing the way we are present in the world, to moving forward with wisdom, is to learn how to be still and learn how to be more present to God. I mean, God is always present. God is always speaking wisdom. Maybe we're the ones who are absent. Maybe we're the ones who aren't listening. Notice how when we listen to another, more often than not, we listen through the lens of what we think we already know they're going to say. We listen through the lens of rehearsing what we're going to say once we get a chance. We listen through the lens of our assumptions and our judgments. Are they right? Do I agree? To practice deep listening, it actually requires emptying of yourself. It requires surrendering your assumptions and what you think you know, so that you can truly be present to the other. So it is with listening to God. So it is with being present to God. It means quieting all of our thoughts, surrendering what we think we already know, our assumptions and our judgments, and to be still, as the psalmist said, and know what we don't know. Yesterday I woke up with the heaviness of 10,000 anxious thoughts. Have you ever been there where first thing you wake up in the morning and you're already kind of anxious? And so what I decided to do, which is what we often normally do, is I decided to attack my anxious thoughts by thinking louder, thinking faster, thinking harder. It didn't work. I just became more anxious. Sometimes trying to approach our anxious thoughts by just thinking more about those thoughts is kind of like changing your stinky shirt when you really need a shower. So I decided to take my anxious thoughts kicking and screaming to the cleansing space of stillness. Sat in this chair and just decided to just take a few moments for a breath prayer, a simple breath prayer, breathing in, breathing out, using the words of the psalmist. Be still as I took a breath in, and know as I took a breath out. Be still and know. I was very familiar with the voice of my anxiety. I wanted to hear a deeper voice, a voice of wisdom. So for 5 or so minutes, I just centered myself in that breath prayer. Be still and know. Be still and know. And after about 5 minutes, I had this kind of inner knowing to call a friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in months, if not over a year. So initially I dismissed it, silly. But it persisted. This inner knowing, this nudging to call this friend. So I called him. And he was in a really dark place. And, he talked a lot. I listened. And then after about an hour or so, he said, "How did you know? How did you know that I needed you to call just at that moment?" And I said, "Honestly, I didn't know. But fortunately, God knew. And God was just waiting for me to listen." Thomas Merton said silence is God's first language. Everything else is a poor translation. The quieter we can become, the more we hear, the more we hear those things that are most important to hear. One of the best stories in the Bible is the story of Elijah. And it's found in 1 Kings chapter 19, this particular part of the story. It's about the year 900 BCE. And King Ahab is the king of Israel. And he marries Jezebel, Queen Jezebel, who's from another country, who's not a particularly nice person. And Jezebel brings with her the many gods of her land. And King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, they were power hungry. And they used those many gods, which were the gods of violence and greed, to stay in control. King Ahab ruled the land with violence and greed. Well, Elijah, like many of the other prophets, saw his role to call people back to the God of Israel, the one true God. So Elijah was able to show that the gods that Ahab and Jezebel were proclaiming, the gods of violence and greed, were really false gods. That God, the God of Israel, was God. Well, this infuriated Jezebel. So Jezebel threatened Elijah with his life, said she was going to kill him. So Elijah ran for his life. And he found himself in a cave at Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. And Elijah, at this stage, didn't know what to do, didn't know where to go. He was exhausted and didn't know what was next. I was thinking, after the year that we've had, that feels like a familiar feeling. Exhausted. Not sure what's going to happen next. And there's a small little detail in chapter 19, a small little detail in the story that I don't want you to miss. Because Elijah found himself alone and afraid. And in order to find the wisdom as we emerge from the crises of this past year, in order to find that important wisdom that will help us to find a way forward, we need to realize in this story, an angel appeared to Elijah and said, "Eat, or else the journey ahead will be too much for you." So in this story, we see that the voice of wisdom is a voice, if we're willing to listen, that says, take care of yourself. Eat. Find sustenance for your body, for your soul. Or else the journey ahead will be too much for you. What does that look like for you in these challenging times, in this time where there's so much loss and pain? What's self-care look like for you? How do you take care of yourself? Because the story seems to be suggesting that, that in that state of exhaustion, it's hard to listen. It's hard to be still. It's hard to find wisdom. So I know most of you are really, really, really good at taking care of others. You're really good at feeding others. That's what I love about this congregation. You are really good at caring for others. I wonder how good you are at caring for yourself. I wonder how good you are at listening to what your soul needs. You know, asking for help, being willing to receive the help that is offered. I mean, asking for help is not weakness. It's a desire to be strong. When we practice self-care, we're actually caring for the people whose lives we touch. So in this story, Elijah found himself alone, afraid, exhausted. And the angel says to him, as the angel says to all of us who are exhausted after the crises of this last year, eat. Find sustenance for your body, for your soul, for your mind, or else the journey ahead will be too much for you. And then the next part of the story, we discover that sometimes in order to find the wisdom for new ways of being in the world, maybe we have to be open to listening for God in new ways. I mean, Elijah was a prophet. Elijah was trained and experienced as a prophet, listening to God in the normal ways that God was normally heard in his time. You know, I think of the past year where it's been almost a year since we've worshiped in normal ways. Are we learning and being open to hearing God in new ways? Well, first the story says Elijah assumed that he would hear the voice of God in a great wind, in a mighty wind, which was understandable because throughout Hebrew Scripture, the power of God was often associated with the wind. I mean, the very word of wind here in chapter 19, ruha, the Hebrew word, is the same word for the Spirit of God we find in Genesis 1, the Spirit that hovered over the chaos at the beginning of creation. So Elijah assumed that he would hear God in the mighty wind, but God wasn't in the wind. So then Elijah assumed that he would hear God in an earthquake. Again, that would have been expected. Divine revelation, divine activity was often associated with the earth shaking. When God delivered the law to Moses, it says the earth shook on Mount Horeb, the very place that Elijah is standing. But it says the voice of God was not in the earthquake. And then, most assuredly, the presence of God would be known in fire. I mean, that was a very common place where God was experienced. I mean, think of Moses and the burning bush. Think of the pillar of fire that led the Israelites who were wandering through the wilderness. But it says God was not in the fire. So in those usual ways, wind, earthquake, fire, where God would normally be experienced and heard, God wasn't heard. But then the story says, after the wind, after the earthquake, after the fire, there was the sound of sheer silence. And Elijah encountered the sacred, encountered God in the sound of sheer silence. And that changed everything for Elijah. Someone asked me last week, they said, I'm going to spend time with my mother, who's in the last stages of life and is about to transition from this life to more life. And she said, can you give me words? I don't know what to say. I said, say nothing. Words in many ways will be inadequate. Just be there. Just be willing to be there and trust that the silence itself will speak more eloquently the language of love than 10,000 words. And if you can be there, I said to her, if you can be still, maybe both you and your mom will know the love that holds you both. You know, one of the things I've noticed as in my ministry, where I've been invited into the sacred privilege of spending time with people who are dying, one of the things I've noticed is those moments of sheer silence are often the moments of the profound presence of the sacred, the profound presence of God. I remember holding my dad. I was able to be with my dad in the last moments of his life. And I remember holding him as he took his last breath. It was just he and I in the room. The sound of sheer silence filled that room. But I can't explain it. I can't explain it. Even though my heart was just breaking open with unspeakable grief, I also felt this peace, this sacred presence. I knew, not here, I knew I wasn't alone. Love was there. And I didn't have to be afraid. You know, Howard Thurman was a leader in the civil rights movement. And Howard Thurman said, you know, we really need to learn from Jesus. If you look at the stories of Jesus, again and again and again, Jesus would go to a solitary place. And after he spent time in stillness, after Jesus would make himself present to the presence of God, healing would flow, justice would flow, love would flow. And Howard Thurman said those who are fighting injustice, those who are trying to right all that is wrong, if they're going to endure in that work, they need to listen. They need to be still and listen to the sound of sheer silence. Because Thurman said, if we're able to be still, we might be able to hear the whispers in the heart speaking courage to our fear, hope to our despair. I really believe, I'm convinced, that if we can learn to be still, to be present to God in stillness, it will change the way we are present in the world. So here's the spiritual practice that I want to suggest to you during the season of Lent. Just a simple A simple spiritual practice that might help you to be still and to be present to God in a way that just might change the way you are present in the world. It's using the words of the psalmist, Psalm 46, be still and know that I am God. You know, be still and know. So here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to spend 5 minutes, could be 3 minutes, could be 2 minutes, but say 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes every night. And just take that phrase of the psalmist, be still and know that I am God. And just say, be still and know that I am God. Allow your breathing, because so often our anxiety, our stress, our fear, our pain, we hold in the tightness of our chest. Just take a few moments to try to breathe deeply, slowly. Try to allow your breath to drop from your chest to about 2 inches behind your belly button. Breathing slowly and deeply, just repeating, be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still. Be. And when you get to be, just take 3 deep breaths and start back up the top. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still. Be. And just kind of repeat that rhythm for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. If you get distracted, you're going to get distracted. Just go back to that phrase. Go back to your breath. Be present to God in the stillness. For the next few minutes in this visual meditation, let's try it out. Experiment. Try it. Be still and know that I am God. Be present to God in the stillness of this next few moments. And just see what happens. St. John of the Cross said, silence is when God's Spirit of peace secretly anoints your soul, so that your life might anoint the souls of others with love. May it be so. Jesus said, whatever we do for the least of our brothers and sisters, we do for him. When we care for those in need, we are offering the gift of our hearts to Jesus. Food for the hungry, care for the sick, drink for those who are thirsty, hospitality for strangers, a warm and safe place to sleep for those left out in the cold. Letting children and youth know how loved they are. Compassion and release for those imprisoned in mind, body, and spirit. First Presbyterian Church of Bend exists to serve Jesus by serving those in need, creating spaces of grace and bringing love and compassion, hope and healing where and when it is needed the most. Your generosity makes it possible for us to be generous in love. When there are so many who are struggling, I ask you to please be generous in your giving to help us help those in need. You can text your gift, give online, or mail a check to the church. As we love and serve the least of our brothers and sisters, we love and serve Jesus. Thank you.
In the stillness of this moment, there is peace. There is peace. In the stillness of this moment, there is peace. There is peace. And I rest and trust and breathe. And know that in the stillness of this moment there is peace. In the stillness of this moment there is love. There is love. In the stillness of
Friends, thanks so much for joining us in worship today. Remember those words from Jan Richardson. Let there be an opening into the quiet that sits beneath the chaos. And there we might find what shimmers within the storm. We might find the peace we didn't think possible. And this blessing. May your ears listen in the silence for God's wisdom. May your mouth speak of God's goodness. May your arms hold those in need. May your feet walk towards justice. May your heart trust its worth. May your soul dance in God's grace. And may this be your rhythm, again and again and again, until that day, that promised day, where love wins. Go with courage. Go with heart. Go in peace, my friends.